Open Boundaries 9221 asks the question, is there a case for going 12 Nm or higher with a DD wheel? And what are the benefits? Welcome back to the Game of Muscle YouTube channel. Click the like button and subscribe, and throw us your questions if you have a question like this. To answer the question though, the benefits of a higher Nm wheel than 12 Nm, keeping in mind that 12 Nm is basically the sweet spot for a direct drive wheel. Most people would be totally happy with 12 Nm, but the benefit of having even more Nm of available torque in a direct drive wheel is mostly a case of if you're driving Formula cars, Formula 1, prototypes, faster vehicles, high downforce vehicles, and you drive those vehicles on tracks like Spa, and you're going up through Eau Rouge, or you're doing situations where there's a lot of load from downforce, and as a result the force feedback should be quite heavy and the load on the car's heavy. You have more range there for you to be able to still get details with higher load, or more obvious details with higher loads on the simulated vehicle. The dynamic range potential, or the range of output of newton meters for the wheel, is higher, and therefore you don't need to compress the force feedback that the game is putting out as a signal. You don't need to compress that into a lower newton meter range. Now, generally speaking though, that's not really that much of a problem. Even like an 8 Nm wheel, you'll be totally fine. You should be able to feel anything coming out from a simulator. Unfortunately, not all the driving simulators are programmed as well as they probably could be for force feedback, and the way that force feedback is sent to the user is not always as good as it probably could be, or certainly isn't as good as it could be. So some simulators play much better with high Newton meter wheels than others, but by the time you've got to at least 12 Newton meters, you're pretty much secured, and you really don't need that extra strength unless you're really looking for that little bit more oomph. So that dynamic range thing is probably the biggest actual reasonable argument for it. Going back historically though, when this is before like podium DDs, or even with like OSWs, going back to like OSW time, some of the higher Newton meter motors, or larger motors with larger power supplies, the motors themselves were physically a larger motor, and by putting more power into them and the nature of the mechanics of those larger DD motors, you would actually get a kind of a more natural kind of inertia and damping from the wheelbase, from its mechanics, and the extra power and oomph would overcome that inertia, but end up with quite a natural feeling wheel, which made those higher Newton meters, we're talking like 25-30 Newton meter motors, it actually made them feel a bit better than lower Newton meter OSW solutions and custom solutions. Since then though, there has been a lot of development in servo motors that are specifically used for racing simulators, and your Fanatec's, your Mosers, your Simucubes, your Acertecs, all that stuff. All those motors are really much better dialed in now, so that you don't really get the issues of the mechanics of the motor being that relevant in the same way. It's more down to the software now, and we also have way better software algorithms for doing damping, smoothing and interpolation pretty much across the board on all the DDs now, so you don't really need to fall back on some mechanical component of the motor. Also, back in the day, the motor would be relatively a similar price whether or not it was a chonky huge motor that did 30 or 40 Newton meters versus a 20 Newton meter motor. So you might be like, oh, I'll just spend another extra £100 or £150 or something and just have the larger motor, because why not? Power supply would cost more for a larger power supply, and there's some like nuance to it. It gets very complicated when you actually delve into it, if you were there in the early days of the OSWs and DD wheels. But yeah, basically, to get to the point directly, which I know I find hard, ultimately, yeah, you do benefit from having a 20 or so Newton meter wheel still now, and I guess if you were going to simulate an Indy car, a 90 2000s Indy car, or F2 cars that don't have power steering, that are fast cars with downforce, and you wanted also that sort of bump steer effect to be very aggressive and firm and return immediately, like really crazy sort of that bump steer you get. Maybe some vintage cars, though some vintage cars actually have quite light steering, but there's some specific effects that you'll only really be able to get with a sort of 20 Newton meter DD wheel. But they're very marginal, and also most people just are not going to be running their force feedback that strong. I mean, I've got an OSW, a Simplicity OSW, and we've used a Fanatec podium, and I've used like 20-30 meter Newton wheels. At the moment, we're using a 12 Newton meter wheel, and to be honest, if you do a lot of sim racing, you'll turn the forces down anyway. You could make an argument that having a stronger wheel does also give more overhead. So even with the 12 Newton meter wheel we've got, I run that lower than 12 Newton meters, and so that gives me the overhead to dial it down a bit, and then maybe occasionally run higher force if I want to. Again, you do have the range in the game, so there's going to be an argument of how strong do you generally want it, and how much do you want to, how often do you want to use that extra strength. So, you know, if it doesn't cost any more to have a higher strength wheel, you might as well have one. But say 12 Newton meters is kind of the sweet spot for in terms of just pragmatically sim racing. But that is pretty much the main reasons and arguments for having a stronger Newton meter over a 12 Newton meter wheel. 12 Newton meters is a very good sweet spot. But I get, in fairness, if price was not a consideration whatsoever, then you might as well just have 20 Newton meters as a sort of cut-off, and then probably most people would never drive at 20 Newton meters. But I think that would be a very absolute, like you're talking like 0.0001% of players that would regularly want to drive at 20 plus Newton meters, especially when you consider how loose modern direct drive motors are, how precise direct drive motors are, the actual speed and the slew rate and all those components of modern direct drive wheels are so good now. Even at lower strengths you get fantastic fidelity, and hopefully moving forwards the software should hopefully better utilise the nature of direct drive wheels, so that you even then wouldn't even benefit from the strength or need to use the range. So yeah, there you go. Did that answer the question? I don't know. Hopefully it did. But that's it. That's that question answered. Click the like button, subscribe, and I'll try and answer more sim racing questions. Thank you for watching this. Really appreciate it. Till the next one, happy tea drinking. Take care and goodbye.